Welcome to the VandySports podcast from the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by The Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland & Belk, and the Maynard Nexen Government Contracts Group. Topics on today's show are brought to you by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. That partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, and they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more info, visit their website at mpmci.com. Topics today, we're previewing Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. We're going to dive into what Clark Lee said about how the Commodores are handling the heat. It's going to be hot tomorrow morning, but it also could rain a little bit, so maybe that affects things as well. Hopefully there's no delay, of course, as there typically is. There's typically something weird in these Week 1 matchups at Vanderbilt Stadium, now First Bank Stadium on West End. But we'll hear from Clark Lee on how his team has been handling the heat and preparing for the heat that they will see on Saturday morning. Also, 3 matchups to watch with Joey Dwyer to preview this matchup and dive into the details, the nitty-gritty of this matchup and what fans should be looking for as they head to First Bank Stadium on Saturday. Also, Andrew Allegretta, play-by-play voice of Vanderbilt football in the booth, along with Norman Jordan and Kevin Ingram on 102.5 The Game, also VUCommodores.com. He gives us a little personal anecdote on Virginia Tech coming to Nashville. He was with Virginia Tech for a good bit, 2011 to 2018, as a sideline reporter, and worked in the booth there with some really talented broadcasters. So we'll talk about that. The Hokies return to Nashville, and also preview the matchup from his perspective and what he's seen from fall camp. And then we'll close it out with Andy Bitter, a guy that's covered Hokie football for a long time. He's with TechSideline.com. Great breakdown of the Hokies and what to expect in Saturday's matchup. Before we do, though, our interview portion is brought to you by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If your loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. Now time to preview this matchup. Before we get to Joey Dwyer, though, his 3 matchups to watch, a little bit of background on both these teams. Obviously, this is at First Bank Stadium. 28,934 is the new seating capacity, with the north end zone being finished. Obviously, the inside of that building not quite finished, looking at around Christmas time for that. But obviously, the seating is sold out there. So it should be really cool to see for fans walking into the stadium what the north end zone looks like. The game is on ESPN, so right after College game day, keep it on ESPN. You got the Hokies and the Commodores going at it. Roy Philpott, Sam Acho, and Taylor Davis on the call. You can also listen to it on 102.5 The Game. Well, these two teams have an interesting history. Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech first met at Dudley Field back in 1930. That was a 40-0 Vanderbilt win. I know Vanderbilt fans are hoping that happens on Saturday. They didn't play again until 1965. That was a 21-10 Vanderbilt win in Nashville. They met each year from 82 to 86. Vanderbilt took the first game in that run, 45-0, and then the Hokies captured the next 4 games. The last meeting came in Blacksburg, 1989, an 18-0 Virginia Tech win. So it's been a while. It's been a while since these two teams got together. Virginia Tech's last trip to Nashville, the 1998 Music City Bowl. So Hokie fans are really excited to get to Nashville, but obviously Vanderbilt fans are excited to see this new look team with new coaches like Tim Beck and Jerry Kill. Obviously Clark Lee making some changes, bringing some transfer portal players in. We'll talk about a lot of that new talent with Joey Dwyer, and Andrew Allegretta touched a lot on the coaching staff. But again, Saturday morning, 11 a.m. kickoff, probably a little after 11 a.m. It's typically there after game day. I'm sure the guys will make predictions for this game, so that should be fun. But again, 11 a.m. on ESPN at First Bank Stadium, Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. All right, but first, before we kick it over to Joey Dwyer and his 3 things to watch, let's kick it over to Clark Lee. He spoke yesterday in regards to how his team has been preparing to handle the heat. It's going to be into the mid-90s. Rain might help, but rain is not a sure thing. You never know about the forecast here in Nashville. Here's what Clark Lee had to say about how his guys have been working hard throughout this week of practice to handle the heat on Saturday morning.
Well, we've been indoors the last 2 days, so we in preparation, obviously we had the 11 a.m. scrimmage to get in it, to feel it. On Sunday, we were in the stadium in the heat. That was our practice was at like 3 o'clock, so we got the full effect of Sunday's heat dome. And then being in it on Tuesday was kind of our last, chance to like experience it. That was 110 minutes. We've come inside the last 2 days as part of the heat plan. That's just to get total recovery with our body and to physically be feeling good. And then it's about the next 48 hours pushing hydration and getting them ready that way. On Saturday, we got to trust our training. So, we've pushed through a hard summer and a hard camp, and hopefully we got our bodies back and we feel good. The hotter it is and the more we're impacted by it, the more people you got to play. And so, we have to be ready to put people in, insert people maybe early in the game to give them a chance to, spell a one for a series just to make sure that we're ready in the fourth quarter. I don't expect that, but obviously we'll be ready for it if it happens.
All right, now let's keep this podcast rolling. To get you set for this matchup, let's take it over to Joey Dwyer with his 3 matchups to watch. Off the pregame show with Joey Dwyer. We're back with his maybe not 5 things to watch. We're going to rename it 3 matchups to watch within this game between Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. 11 a.m. kickoff, First Bank Stadium here in Nashville. But Joey, let's set the stage a little bit. I mean, this is a big opportunity for Vanderbilt. Year 4 of Clark Lee, facing an opponent that has proven their concept. The proof is in the pudding for Virginia Tech. It might not have been the entirety of last season, but down the stretch of last year, Virginia Tech really came on behind Kyron Drones and their rushing attack. And so this is a proven product, the Hokies are, that Vanderbilt is facing. So it'll be a challenge, but it's also not an insurmountable opportunity that this team is facing.
Yeah, I think Saturday is a huge game for Vanderbilt. It's not going to be season defining or anything, but I think it could be a precursor to a lot of what we see for the entire season. We're going to have to see something more than we saw last year. Clark Lee talked all offseason about the changes he's made and how the infrastructure of the program has improved, and we talk a lot about the offense and how it's going to be different, and that's probably a good thing. We talk about how the defense is going to look different schematically, how guys are going to take leaps because of Clark Lee as the defensive coordinator. Now it's time for us to see that, Billy. They have talked all offseason about the changes they've made. We're going to need to see some proof that those changes were the right things to do, and that even if they were the right things to do, they're actually going to make some difference. And that's really what I'm looking for this Saturday. I can't leave that stadium thinking that their offense is completely overmatched and that it's gimmicky or the systems they're running are obsolete. I can't leave that stadium thinking, man, they are just completely overmatched at the line of scrimmage. Those thoughts can't be with people in the media after that game because they should be past that at this point. And I think Saturday is a great opportunity for them to prove that they're past a lot of what has hampered them in the past, because I think Clark Lee has talked all offseason about NIL has been improved. They've improved their infrastructure, all these things. Billy, it's time for that to show up now. And I think it doesn't have to be shown up in a win, but they have to look at least competitive with a team like Virginia Tech. And I think that will go a long way with selling their program, because if they look like a 2-10 team on Saturday, it's really hard to sell hope of an improved product to that fan base.
Yeah, we might be sweating walking out of the stadium because of how hot it'll be, but Vanderbilt fans shouldn't be sweating walking out of the stadium about what the rest of the season is going to look like. That's a good way to put that. Vanderbilt fans should have an easy feeling. If there's an uneasy feeling, even if it's a loss, right? I think is what you're trying to get at. If this is a competitive, hard-fought game where Vanderbilt's in it in the fourth quarter, what you're saying is that is something you can take away, as opposed to just being totally uncompetitive like they were last year in certain games.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's all about the level of compete. And I know Clark Lee talks about that, but I think that's a real thing. Like, they cannot get ran off the field on Saturday and expect for people to buy into the product that they're selling. And that matters more than ever nowadays, that people are buying into what you're putting out. You have to have a way to get people on board. And Diego Pavia talked about how people don't know what he can do. You got to show people what you can do. Clark Lee, I think, has talked about how he's confident in what they've done this offseason. Time for some proof of that. I just think Vanderbilt has so much to prove on Saturday, and it would be a huge step back for the program if they go out there and just get ran off their own field, because I think that happened way too many times last year, and Vanderbilt fans have to have some reason to buy into this team and some reason for optimism, and that doesn't have to be them winning as 13.5-point underdogs. They've got to probably at least cover that spread, though, and they've got to look more competent on the line of scrimmage. Their secondary has to look better, and their offense just has to look like a Vanderbilt offense should. They've got to be able to take care of the ball. There can't be a whole lot of mental mistakes, and we're not expecting them to play a perfect game by any means, because they're playing against a team that's better than them, but they have to look like they belong on the same field as Virginia Tech on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Joey, let's hop into the three matchups that you say will define Vanderbilt's matchup with Virginia Tech overall. And again, I know last year maybe this was a longer segment, but I think getting into these three matchups specifically and giving more detail on them will be a better look at the matchup ahead. And I like how you put this, Joey, that the margin is always small for Vanderbilt, but there are some matchups and some one-on-ones that if they're able to win tomorrow, that Vanderbilt will have a shot. And so we're going to start with Virginia Tech's receivers against Vanderbilt's corners. You got Colby Taylor, Martell Height, Tyson Russell. I think those three guys will probably play the most. I think you will see some Jalen Lackey as well. I think you'll see some Trudell Berry and maybe even some Taco Wright. But Virginia Tech's receivers are not elite, but they've got 3 or 4 guys that played a lot last year and had some production last year. So that'll be a challenge. I don't know that this isn't getting ready to face Tennessee type receivers or LSU type receivers, but these Virginia Tech receivers know what this offense expects of them, and they had good seasons last year. So this is a matchup to watch, and Vanderbilt this can't be a game like Missouri last year where Brady Cook and Luther Burden just treated it like the video game. Vanderbilt has to stand up taller against these receivers who aren't world beaters, right? I think that's a good thing for Vanderbilt. They're not facing a freak receiver, but they've got 3 or 4 guys that are pretty good.
Yeah, to me, it's the proven versus the unproven, and that's why this was one of the matchups to watch for me. Virginia Tech's receivers, we know what they are. We know they're not elite, but we know they have a couple guys that can really hurt you if you don't have capable corners, and that was what it was like last year. We talked about this in the cornerback preview. Vanderbilt cannot get torched by receivers that aren't Luther Burden or aren't high-level receivers at Georgia or whatever. Average receivers, Vanderbilt has to be able to keep in check, and these are probably above-average receivers, but these aren't the receivers that should be going for 150, 200 yards on you. And I'm a little nervous on Vanderbilt's behalf about what this will look like. Colby Taylor, I think, is going to do some good things, but we still got to prove it at the SEC level. And then opposite of him, I think I have a ton of questions. Martell Hyde, I think, is capable of having a good year, but I just didn't see enough out of him in camp to be super confident in him. Tyson Russell, I think I saw a lot of in camp, but last year still kind of sits in the back of my head. So, again, it's just proven Virginia Tech receivers versus unproven Vandy corners. And that's a position group for Vanderbilt that I think we're looking at in a broad sense is like, if they can't handle Virginia Tech's receivers, that could be one of the talking points that you're saying, man, they are in trouble. Because that's how it was last year in week 1 or week 0. It's like you're looking at their corners and they're barely able to defend Hawaii's guys. So what are they going to do against SEC receivers? I think, again, on Vanderbilt's behalf, I'm a little nervous because I think we could be walking out of First Bank on Saturday talking about how Virginia Tech's receivers kind of made light work of Vandy's corners, and I think that would be a really poor sign for Vanderbilt moving forward. I think their secondary is improved as a whole, but they're already shorthanded at corner, and I think they're unproven there as well. So that's a big matchup for me to watch. Virginia Tech's got guys who are proven and know the offense and know what's expected of them, and I think Vanderbilt is the bigger question mark there, and it seems like that's been the case a lot recently. Vanderbilt can answer those questions in a big way on Saturday, and if they do that, I think you got some real optimism about their secondary.
Yeah, that would be a bad look if Virginia Tech and Kyron Drones are able to light Vanderbilt up through the air. this is a run heavy offense. They do have some guys, Daquan Felton, Jalen Lane, Steven Gosnell. They all combined for about 1,500 yards last year. So it's the combined production that I think scares you, where it's one of 4 or 5 guys that could hurt you. They also have Ollie Jennings, who was hurt last year, coming back this year. So obviously that is something to watch on Saturday. Joey, let's move on to second matchup to watch. Vanderbilt's offensive line, new look offensive line, new positional terminology, new head coach, new players against Virginia Tech's defensive line. That is certainly proven. They were, I think, second in the ACC in sacks, or maybe it's third last year. Antoine Powell-Ryland, who comes back, all ACC type player. They got a transfer from Duke as well. That's a really good player. This is a test from Vanderbilt's offensive line. And it's good that we're going to see this test, because we're going to see what this offensive line is made up of early on. And can guys like Xavier Castillo and Kivo Wesley, who are older guys that have been in this program, can they step up? Because I think we know what we're going to get for the most part from Gunnar Hansen and Chase Mitchell. Maybe Mitchell slightly more of a question mark than Hansen, but I just think those guards, man, those is it quick guard? Are those the quick guards on the end? Quick and strong. So the stronger on the inside, correct?
Well,
I think that's
on the side of the line of scrimmage. So it's like the field and the boundary.
Okay, true. I'm not even going to try to get deeper into that, but Joey, still a good offense. Still a good matchup to watch. And I think this will be something when we look in the fourth quarter. If Vanderbilt's down 2-3 scores, it'll probably be because Virginia Tech's been able to get to the quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of turnover on the Virginia Tech defensive line, which makes it really interesting for me. But another thing, Virginia Tech has allocated about 25% of its total scholarships towards the defensive line. And I don't know how exactly that compares to other programs, because you obviously need a lot of bodies there, but they really hit that hard in the portal. And they do have some really good returners as well. And again, Vanderbilt, unknown on the offensive line. I think that's an interesting position, because there's 3 returners starting on it. But also, I think it's really unknown exactly what they have, because did Kiva Wesley get better? Did Castillo get better? What does Steven Lasoya and Chase Mitchell look like? I just don't know. I think Virginia Tech is going to be really physical. I think they got some really good athletes. And Billy, I think that's a matchup, again, that'll tell you a lot about where Vanderbilt's at in terms of the bodies it has. And I think the offensive line is kind of a microcosm of where Vanderbilt is in its build, because I think last year the offensive line just didn't have enough capable athletes and bodies. And that kind of told you that Vanderbilt was behind in its build and kind of what it was doing, because you can make up for some things with some skilled guys on the perimeter, which Vanderbilt tried to do last year. I don't think you could hide the talent differential on the offensive line, just because there's so many bodies there, and there's such a difference between a high-level offensive line in the SEC and what it looks like physically versus what Vanderbilt has. So I'm really interested to see just how close they are to being even a league average group there. And I think we'll learn a lot about that Saturday against a team that I think has a really deep defensive line. They're probably their 2 deepest position groups are receiver and defensive line. So that's really what I'm kind of searching for there, is can Vanderbilt keep up with a ton of athletes and a ton of rotating there? It'll be interesting. I think they do have some improved talent there. I'm just not 100% sure that it's going to be enough to slow down a group with that kind of depth. And they do have some top-end guys too as well, Billy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a talented defensive line, and Vanderbilt obviously has faced that before being in the SEC, and that's a big matchup to watch. But another one, Kyron Drones' legs against Vanderbilt's front 7. Now, front 7 includes front 4, your 3 linebackers. So guys like Patterson, Longwell, Fontenette, I think are more important than the front 4, because, Joey, I don't have a ton of trust in the front 4 to hold up and get into the backfield consistently and hold up their end of the bargain. Nothing against those guys. It's just Vanderbilt hasn't proven that really under Clark Lee, that their defensive line can be good enough. But their linebackers, I think, and the star position there with Fontenette, I think can be good enough. Now, there's a lot of pressure on them. So that's what I look at in this matchup as well. But Drones' legs could be the matchup. If Drones goes off, Joey, and has a career rushing day, Vanderbilt's done. So I think he can get his yards, but you can't let him just get completely loose and tear you apart with his legs.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly capable of doing that, right? That's probably the thing that they honed in on the most when we asked them about Virginia Tech on the last day of fall camp is got to keep him in the pocket. And I'll let Marlon Sewell, their captain, it was interesting. He's second or third on the depth chart. I kind of expected him to be second, but him with an or with Steven Sanianola is interesting to me. But I'll let him explain this to me or for me. He said yesterday or Tuesday, we know we've got to keep the quarterback in the pocket. We don't want him to get out. We want to keep him caged, limit explosive plays. And if we do those things, we'll come out of the game with a victory. I think they know that Drones is going to beat him over the air or through the air. If they let him do both, if they let him use his legs to escape plays when they get in the backfield or cover well, and they let him tear him up through the air, I mean, they got no chance, right? So I think the easier of the two to contain is his legs. And Vanderbilt, we've talked all offseason about how they're supposed to have improved depth on the D-line. Their linebacker position is strong. Time to prove it. And I think that's a huge test for them right away and a great barometer for kind of what they have. If Kyron Jones can just do whatever he wants, they're going to have a really hard time. But if they kind of make him into a one-dimensional guy, and it doesn't have to be taking away his legs. Maybe they take away some of the things he can do through the air, but he can't do both. And that's kind of my point here is if they can make him one-dimensional, I think they've got a real chance to win the game. I don't know that I have a ton of optimism they can do that at this point, but we talked a lot about their depth on the defensive line and their speed at linebacker, their improved physicality at linebacker. Got a better chance to do it than they have in the past.
Yeah, Joey, it's the age-old Bill Belichick style of play on defense. It'll make you play with your left hand. I mean, it's like the basketball style of play as well. You force a guy left that's strong right, he's gonna have a tougher time.
I think Clark said that too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Kyron Jones wants to run the football. He's more comfortable toting the football, and getting close to 100 yards a game. I mean, he had almost 900 rushing yards last year, but through the air, Joey, they weren't prolific. They weren't awful, but I think 97th in the country, like 220 passing yards per game. So Kyron Jones doesn't want to sit in the pocket and drop the ball all over the field. Now, maybe he's improved in that regard and is an improved passer, but he doesn't. From last year, he doesn't want to do that. So make him play left-handed, and you're right. I think if Vanderbilt's able to do that, I mean, would you agree with Sewell there? I think that. That's a big if, though. Like
that's a big if.
Yeah. So
totally. And then
it'll go ahead.
One other thing, Billy. Before I get off, I think I'm going to name my starting quarterback for the week.
Here we go.
I don't think it should be any surprise, but I'm gonna estimate that Diego Pavia will be the starter this week. Just wanted to get my prediction out there because I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but I think both of us need to name a starter before the week.
Are you burning a source?
No, there's no source. I mean, look at the captain list, Billy.
Yeah, but also I loved Diego put on Twitter his doctor. I don't know when this picture was taken. It was during a surgery. I don't even know when he had surgery, but the doctor's tweet basically said QB1. So yeah, we've known for a while, I think, at least in our opinions, and that's something you can't scoff over and forget about. That Vanderbilt has their guy, but still, I mean, don't forget about Nate Johnson and also Drew Dickey, because I think we'll both see those guys as well some. But Joey, parting thoughts here before kickoff. I know we'll have some last minute thoughts tomorrow early in the morning, but what are you taking away here to close it out?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge game for them, Billy. It's not a must-win game or anything along those lines, but it's a must-compete game, if that makes sense. Like, they can't get run off the field tomorrow. That would just be a huge step back for their program as a whole and what they're trying to build. Got to see a lot from Diego Pavia. I just think it's hilarious that it's still an open quarterback competition, and he's saying in the presser, people don't know what I'm going to do. What I can do, I'm going to prove it on Saturday. But besides that, they've got lots to prove offensively. They've got a lot of new systems that people haven't seen yet, that some people are skeptical of, the way they've built this thing. I think it's a big Saturday for them to be able to kind of shut those people up, and those people are going to continue to talk if this goes poorly. And it's a big game for them, Billy. Big spread, but there's some optimism that maybe they could turn this thing around, and Saturday would be a huge starting point for them to be able to do it.
Yeah, there's some hope in the air. I think for Vanderbilt fans, week one, always hope springs eternal. Nobody's lost a game yet, but come Saturday night, week one, there's going to be some upset fan bases and Vanderbilt fans hoping they're not one of them. But 11 a.m. kickoff. Joey and I will be up early. We definitely will get a last-minute thoughts in early tomorrow morning. So stay tuned for that and all of our coverage tomorrow on game day. That's Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick, and we'll keep this pregame show rolling coming up. Great stuff there from Joey Dwyer, of course, right here at VandySports.com. We'll have great coverage all day on game day tomorrow. Now on to our next interview. But first, a word from the Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. And now on to the interview with Andrew Allegretta. Rolling along with our pregame show, now happy to be joined by Andrew Allegretta, play-by-play voice for Vanderbilt football in the booth, along with Norman Jordan and Kevin Ingram as well on the sidelines. Looking forward to the call on Saturday, 11 a.m. kickoff. Andrew, before we start, just give fans an idea of what the radio broadcast will look and sound like, of course, more importantly, and maybe some new things that you guys might be excited about.
Well, first off, I think the fact that, hi, good
Hello.
to be back. It's genuinely exciting to talk football again. Like it was yesterday as we record this that I sat down and I did Clark's pregame interview. And it was great to get back there and do a pregame interview with Clark. So I am genuinely excited to have football start off again. Radio broadcast, nothing dramatic. Back on 102.5, the game from most of our broadcasts here in Nashville. Some of them with the Preds conflicts will flip to 94.9. But as always, you can find us on the Vanderbilt Athletics app. There's also a stream option on VUCommodores.com. One thing, it's incredibly small, but if people are so inclined, there's a spot on VUCommodores.com/radio at the bottom of the page where you can submit questions, concerns, anything, all of that sort of stuff. If you got a question during the broadcast, shoot us a note. And that's for football, basketball, baseball. That's available all season long. But that's VUCommodores.com/radio at the bottom of the page.
Man, it is exciting. You're right, and it's probably particularly exciting for you reuniting with former school Virginia Tech. You were there in their broadcast booth from 2011 to 2018. I was excited to ask you about, what was it like when Jerry Kill got to Virginia Tech? You were not there. You missed him, but we'll be talking about that. And that's something that I think has slipped through the cracks a little bit. That Jerry Kill was a huge part of, getting Virginia Tech back and really improving their running game. And we'll get to that. But just for you, Andrew, let's get personal. What's it going to be like Saturday with the Hokies coming back in town, and maybe a little bit of a taste of what it felt like for you back in the day, because you were there for a while?
It's going to be cool. It may not surprise you to know I've been asked that question a couple of times, so it's giving me a chance to marinate on it for a second. It's usually poised as, is this going to be weird? I don't think it's going to be weird. It's going to be nostalgic. And the thing that is by far the coolest for me, and I think anybody in a work setting that's had a significant mentor understands this. The guy that's calling the Virginia Tech radio broadcast 2 booths down that's my guy. He's the one that hired me first. His name is Bill Roth. He's with a brief pit stop in UCLA, done Virginia Tech games for a long, long time. And I certainly don't have a professional career without Bill's support. So the fact that we get to call the same game 2 booths away from each other is honestly very, very cool, very, very special. The logos thing, not so much. I think it will be fun to see a lot of friends, and it gets outrageously boring. I get it when people say this, but I've called games or worked in college athletics for about 15 years, which is not a lifetime, but that's enough time to make good friends. And the chance that I get to spend an afternoon with some of those friends and see some of those friends this weekend is really special. I look forward to it next year too. Getting to go back And that might be weirder. They're coming to our place. I think going back and being in the visitors booth next year after 4 or 5 seasons in the home booth, on the sideline, the whole bit, like that will be weirder. This is just nostalgic and fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly looking forward to it, and obviously happy for you to be able to connect with some of those old friends. Let's get into Vanderbilt specifically. We'll talk a lot about this matchup a little bit later, but what have you seen from fall camp? What have you what have you enjoyed watching? What have you liked? But also maybe what are some areas where you're excited to see how it shakes out, whether it's a position or a player or two, because there's not a ton of injuries, we have to talk about this year, which I think is encouraging. So that's not a huge storyline, but maybe a couple positives and maybe a couple of negatives that you're looking to see. How does this shake out this year? Because it does feel like there are a couple factors that are very important for this team heading into week 1.
I probably can't say anything that people haven't heard in some form before. I think where I would start with all of this, and if there's a piece to it that I feel like not necessarily has been overlooked, but not talked about as much, because the focus goes to the players, which is rightfully so, but the coaching staff turnover, not just at the coordinator positions, not at Clark, not at Beck, but right on through, from Coach Gregory, who's the associate defensive coordinator, all the way down to Klanakis, your offensive line coach. Like I think people are sleeping on the significance of Klanakis, a former offensive coordinator at Nevada, and everything. It's kind of easy to, and I don't mean this negatively. It's easy to say, oh, he coached Kaepernick, what was kind of focused on the offensive line. He coached Jackson, but was kind of focused on the. I don't know. I think that's a pretty heavy footprint that people should spend a little bit of time thinking about, the way that he wants to help block for Tim Beck's offense and kind of how he can put his fingerprint on it. I love the fact that there is significant head coach experience on this staff. Tim Beck has been a head coach. Jerry Kill has been a head coach. Chris Klanakis, not a head coach, but a lot of years as an offensive coordinator. And of course, you've got Clark Lee, who's now in his 4th season as a head coach. That's a lot of game management, player management experience that I think will serve this team really, really well, especially because Clark is going to have to divvy up his time, as he's talked about. You need really strong voices that you can depend on to coach up the X's and O's, to work on the adjustments, and get people in the right spot. I think one of the things, and I wish everyone could have this experience. One of the things that being a sideline guy for Virginia Tech taught me is how chaotic football sidelines are. Like football coaches, former football players, I'm sure know it. But until you have lived the chaos of a football sideline, it's really hard to understand. And the fact that you've got that many former head coaches or people with a lot of experience, I think that's really significant. What that translates into wins and losses, as always, no idea. But from a steadying hand, that gives me a lot of optimism that they will get to the right places. And then it's just up to the players to execute those situations. Things that concern me. I do think holding up at the point of attack for 4 quarters will be interesting to see. I think there's more depth there. And I know that's been said before, specifically on the defensive line and the offensive line. There's more depth there. That's great. But for 4 quarters, we'll see how that goes. Managing the perimeter. I do think Martell Height can be a really strong cornerback for us, or Barry can be a really strong cornerback for us. I think there are pieces and options up and down the defense that we have not had in quite some time. But managing that over the course of 4 quarters and holding up is going to be significant. I know it's been talked about the wide receiver room. No, it doesn't feel like we've got a standout in the same capacity, but I'm just so intrigued to see how Tim Beck and Jerry Kill can get the most out of his offense. And I think that is such a differentiator than the past couple of seasons. I pulled up NFL draft prospects, and yes, Will Shepherd is listed, depending on how deep you want to go, as someone that could be an NFL draft prospect. And that's a piece that from a skill set standpoint, you would love to have. But from a game day management standpoint, like, we're in such a better position scheming and adjusting with this coaching staff. What I have said a couple of times, and I'll keep saying it, and I'll say it, I'm sure, on Saturday, is that I think this is by far the best coaching staff Clark Lee has had in 4 seasons. And it's certainly a good time to have it after last year. So I am most compelled to see how they manage game situations.
Offensively, for fans headed to the game Saturday, they're going to see a different product, right? Different coaches. You mentioned Klenakis, Jerry Kill, Tim Beck, all 3 very impactful coaches that we've already seen in fall camp, but they'll prove to continue to be impactful throughout the season. But different quarterbacks, like you said, different receivers, running back, fairly similar, to what we saw a year ago. But what are you expecting from this offense, whether it's Diego Pavia, Nate Johnson, and we've seen some from Drew Dickey in camp as well that has been encouraging. But just operationally, but specifically with the quarterbacks, what do you expect from that position to carry on toward the season?
Well, with Diego Pavia, he's obviously been named a captain, so that's not a minimal thing. He is fascinating in every way. In every way, he was the Conference USA Player of the Year a season ago. He's got a toughness and a grit and a determination, which is all cliche words, but it's all there with him. I think the word Clark used in his pregame interview about Diego was magnetism, which is a very Clark word.
That's a Clark word. Yeah,
it's a Clark word, but it paints the picture of what they want. I feel like for the first time with Pavia, Clark has a player that is like the physical representation of what he wants this football team to be. Clark, as we've talked about in the past, for all of his Clark words and his intelligence and his, Vanderbilt education and MBA education, like, that's a tough dude that works really hard. And you were at the press conference the other day when he talked openly about the fact that, he can grind, and he recognizes now that sometimes it's hard for other people to keep up to his grind. And Diego's kind of like the physical representation of that. So I'm really super curious to see how he helps lead an offense in a way that, there's so much respect for Ken Seals, respect for Mike Wright, respect for the skill set of AJ Swan. But none of them match the personality of Diego Pavia. So the fact that Clark has that person on the field, completely intriguing. I'm curious to see. He does not have AJ Swan's arm strength. Like, nobody's going to deny that. In fact, respectfully, just from like an arm strength standpoint, he's probably below the other guys that we've seen the past couple of seasons. I'm not sure that matters, though. Like, I'm going to sound like Norman Jordan. Like, it took me, and he's like internalized this in me for 4 years now, but it's about the ability for the offensive coordinator to call the right plays to match the skill set of the players that you've got on the field. Like, and Norm would talk about that a million times with what Watson Brown could do with Whit Taylor, with Norm, with Alama Matthews, all of those guys. And they were really well-crafted plays for that crew. And I think we're in such a good position with Tim Beck to call plays that match the skill set of this offense. Norm joked that I was like, what was Whit Taylor's arm strength? And he joked. I'm sure Whit could throw it. He said 55 yards as long as there was a 30-mile-per-hour wind in his back. I'm sure he could throw it a little bit further than that. But the point was, you don't need the guy. Did you see Joe Milton the other day in his first throw with the Patriots?
I did.
What was it? It was an overthrow interception.
Yeah.
We don't need that guy. Would I like to have him? Sure. But I want the one that runs the offense. And I saw Diego make a great 40-yard throw right down the seam at practice the other day to Junior Sherrill. That's fine. That's all you need. You just need him to get the safeties and the linebackers back enough that you open up the middle of the field a little bit for the run game, a little bit for your tight ends and all of that sort of stuff, which he's got the arm strength for that.
Physical representation of what Clark wants. I like how you put that. Okay, let's go
I
defensively.
hope I'm right. It sounds nice.
No, I haven't heard it yet. I like it. I like it a lot.
It could be so wrong. We could get out there on Saturday and be like, stop it. So we'll see.
No, I don't think so. We'll see. I love how you put that, though. Let's go defensively. Clark has his stamp now on this group. Randon Fontenette is a guy they brought over from TCU. Corday Sidnor from Purdue. MTSU transfer Zaylen Wood comes in. Some new faces, but you've also got a core there in Patterson and Taylor. You mentioned a Height who played a lot last year. That feels like a good maintaining presence on that defense. What can we expect defensively, especially now that Clark Lee has taken it over? And he did, speaking of the press conference, mention, guys, I may not be dolled up in suits anymore. I just got out of the film room. Defensive coordinator role, obviously has him a little bit busier, during game week. But what are you expecting from this defensive group?
Can I take 1 second to point out something he said at the press conference that I found fascinating?
Sure.
And then we'll get back to the defense. I don't want to chew up too much of people's time.
No, you're good.
But he said, and I thought it was interesting. I'd be curious your take on it. But I talked about it with Norm already too. He said, too often in this program, people focus on one game instead of the whole season. I thought that was a really interesting line. What did you make of that?
Well, I've heard a lot from fans, whether it's on the board or just talking to people that, man, this Virginia Tech game is so huge. A lot of times in Vanderbilt seasons, the season goes how that first game goes. And, well, yeah, I mean, you can say that, but also look back late in seasons. You go back to 2022, Vanderbilt was able to, to get the wins over Kentucky and Florida. I recognize the same thing in that yes, it's one game and it is important, but he mentioned the staff and how this staff, how you improve throughout a season is a reflection of your staff and the quality of your staff. So I noticed that too, and I think we need to pause at times and just say, okay, it's one game. Let's look at this entire sample size before rushing to judgment after one game.
Yeah, I got the same takeaway. I thought it was so interesting. And, some of that is to the larger community. Some of that is to the players too, right? Like we went and lost the Wake Forest game last year, which everyone circled as like, oh goodness, you have to be able to go get Wake Forest. That way you can go to UNLV. That way you can be 4-0. That way you can make and then it didn't happen versus Wake. And the next week was UNLV. And that was kind of it. And it was really, really difficult to get things back on the rails. That's not to lower the expectations for Virginia Tech, but I do think because of all of this experience with Kill, with Beck, like there's a larger picture of what it means to get better as a team throughout the course of the season. And he referenced twice New Mexico State, what they did at the end of the year last year, and Virginia Tech, who finished, I think, 5-2 after getting off to a slow start and went 7-6 and won a bowl game. Okay. Defense. I like the pieces. Like it strikes me as the most compelling and uniquely skilled defense that Clark has had. Like Langston Patterson, CJ Taylor, DeRicky Wright, Fontenette, some of the guys on the defensive line, like Zay Wood is really good. I think the growth of Issa Wataha can be really significant. I mentioned the fact that I saw Darren Agu was kind of down the depth chart a little bit the other day, I think. I wish that would take some strides because he's got the physical tools to do it, but they've got a lot of guys that can make some stuff happen. But again, I go back to the coaches. Like I have more confidence in Clark getting guys to the right spot to allow them to make the play than any of the past couple of seasons. What was it? Clark was like top 20 scoring defense all 3 seasons at Notre Dame. And I respect the fact that the talent level is different. But Clark is deeply regarded as one of the smartest defensive coaches in America. And he wouldn't have climbed up the ranks to Notre Dame if he wasn't. So I love the pieces. The depth, as always, will worry you. We're not the rest of the league when it comes to that. Although I do think we can rotate more defensive linemen than we have in the past, but got to stay healthy in the secondary, got to stay healthy at linebacker. If you can get just enough out of that defensive line that allows you to unleash the second 2 levels, that's compelling.
All right. To close it out here, Virginia Tech comes into town Saturday, 11 a.m. kickoff on ESPN. for you, what are some things you're looking at and you say, okay, if Vanderbilt is able to do this, this game will be competitive. And on the other side, if Virginia Tech is able to do this, it might be harder, right, for this to be a competitive game. So what are the keys you're looking for here, especially when Vanderbilt's defense goes up against a guy like Kyron Drones that proved last season he's not only prolific on the ground, but also through the air with the weapons they have coming back?
It's the run game on both sides. And I think it's fairly clear, I think, on both sides that if Vanderbilt can control those in some capacity and not let them get out of control, then you've got a pretty good shot. Specifically with Drones, I think Norm said the other day he led the team in passing and rushing 6 times. And Clark made the point that what they do uniquely, that's a run-first offense. Like, yes, Drones can, like Milton, throw it over the top. That's fine. His downfield accuracy is not quite as good as people think. He can overshoot. And if he can overshoot, then CJ Taylor or somebody like that can pick him off. But what they do is they'll try to split you with Drones perhaps going one direction and Tootin going the other. And you've got to make a decision as a defense where that ball's going.
Mm-hmm.
And if you miss, they're going to puncture you up the middle. And they're going to stay committed to the run game. If they can control Virginia Tech's run game enough to force Drones to be that passer, middle of the field, down the field, I think they've got a chance to. Will they give up a couple of big plays? Probably. That's a good offense. That's a really good offense with speed on the outside. But if they can control the run game enough, Drones perhaps can make a mistake, get 1 or 2 interceptions, and that can flip a ball game. On the other side, Virginia Tech's defense is good. They've got 2 NFL prospects in Peebles and APR, the transfer from Florida, who played for Florida when Vandy beat them as I'm sitting that way.
Yeah. Powell Ryland. Yep.
Yep. A couple of seasons ago. Those are NFL guys, and Strong, a cornerback, is an NFL guy. They can cause havoc. That's a good defense. But if there was a question mark for them, it was the run defense at times. Like, I think they're very aggressive and you can get them to over pursue. It happened a couple of times last year. NC State was a good example of that. NC State's good. I get it. But Virginia Tech gave up 200 yards rushing 5 times last year. Like, if Vandy can, within reason, run the football and within reason, stop the run game, you're going to take Virginia Tech out of what it wants to be. And that will stretch the game to the fourth quarter.
Football's back. Pregame shows are back. Andrew is back calling a Virginia Tech football game, but this time for Vanderbilt. So it should be fun. And you get to take the trip back up to Blacksburg next year. So obviously looking forward to that one. I might want to go to that too. Blacksburg sounds awesome.
I will say, look, I'm a Commodore through and through, but on Saturdays in the fall, Blacksburg can put on a show.
Yeah. Driving up through the Smokies and Blacksburg, there's nothing like it. So looking forward to it. Kickoff 11 a.m. Saturday, Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. That's Andrew Allegretta. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, guys.
Andy Bitter from TechSideline.com and covering the Hokies for a long, long time up there in Blacksburg. He joins us now to preview Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech Saturday at 11 a.m. But before we preview the matchup, Andy, and again, I appreciate you hopping on, let's talk about the Hokies and what Vanderbilt fans can expect to see from this team, not only against themselves, but this season. Because obviously we all know how many starters they've got coming back. Brent Pry, who of course has connections to Vanderbilt, being with James Franklin here. So does Chris Marv, defensive coordinator. Just start with an overall analysis of what this Virginia Tech team could look like this year.
Yeah, I think a lot like it did at the end of last year when they were sort of humming offensively and defensively. I think you mentioned all the guys coming back from last year. This is sort of what they've been building for a couple years in terms of had to find some depth at certain positions, had to rebuild completely a couple of rooms, had to find a quarterback in Kyron Drones who really makes this whole thing go, a dual threat guy who can run it and pass it. But, defensively, I think they're coming into their own under Brent Pry and Chris Marv there. They started to look a lot better at the end of last season versus the start. And, I think they might have gotten over that hump. You always need to do that as a new coach, is sort of, get your schemes in there, get everybody understanding your culture and everything. And, year 3, this is the time. It should be happening right now.
Yeah, take us back to last year. First, I guess, what was it, 5-6 games, Hokies kind of struggled out of the gate, but then you insert Kyron Drones and all of a sudden this offense starts clicking. What did you see in that? And what about Kyron Drones allows this offense, or at least allowed them last year, to really start cooking?
Mostly with Drones, it was the running element that he brought to this offense. They really reshaped how they were calling plays with him in the game. Grant Wells, the previous quarterback, didn't really have that to his game. He could run, but not like Drones does. And you see Drones, and he's actually a lot bigger in person, or feels like that he is when you see him on the roster. He's well built. He can take a hit. He can dole out a hit out there. And, they went from not being able to run the ball at all to all of a sudden teams have to worry about him. And they ran for 300 yards 3 times last year. So that opens up Bashaw Tootin in the ground game, Malachi Thomas behind him. And, he threw the ball pretty well. Even for not having Ollie Jennings, his top receiver, who got hurt, I think they moved the ball pretty well with the receivers they had. And, that whole thing, I think when the offense started clicking, that helped the defense too, obviously, because they're not giving up the ball on a 3 and out, and all of a sudden the defense is back out there defending for another 8 or 10 play drive, something like that. And I think that showed up in how they stopped the run. They stopped giving up as many big runs. I think the whole team really rallied once Kyron went in as the starter, because he was that much of a difference maker.
And then fast forward to this year, obviously Drones is the signal caller and obviously more comfortable within the offense. Who are the weapons, though? I've heard the last month or so that Virginia Tech has 3 or 4 guys that they can rely on. There may not be a guy, but they've got depth there at receiver. And you mentioned Tootin at running back. Who are those weapons that Drones will go to, and maybe even a go-to guy you might be expecting this year?
Yeah, Tootin at tailback, I think he could be a 1,000-yard back. He was second in the ACC in missed tackles forced last year. And that was behind an offensive line that was still sort of, finding its way. So I think if that group is better and you have Drones there for the entire year, I think he could certainly be a 1,000-yard back. He has those skills. The receivers, they have a deep group. They have 4 graduate students who all decided to come back. Ollie Jennings, DeQuan Felton, Jalen Lane, and Stephen Gosnell. That's pretty rare, especially at a school like Virginia Tech that has never really had receiver depth quite like this. Felton's a big guy, 6'5", just a mismatch problem out there, physical guy on the outside. Jalen Lane's works more in the slot, was at Middle Tennessee before, so Vanderbilt fans might be familiar with him. Pretty shifty guy there and a good operator. Gosnell, I think 16 of his 22 catches last year went for first downs. So he's just sort of a steady, reliable guy in that receiving core. And then you add to the mix Ollie Jennings, who, broke his foot in the second week last year, missed the rest of the season. And he was the guy they brought in to be their top guy. He had 2 touchdowns in the opener against ODU. So you add him to the group of receivers that they had last year. And I think, that's more receiving weapons than Virginia Tech's had in the time that I've covered this program. That's been 13 years. So maybe not as big a numbers for each of them as you might expect, because they kind of have to share the wealth. But across the board, I think they could put a certain number of guys in the game and still feel pretty comfortable about production.
All right, let's go over to that Brent Pry, Bud Foster, lunch pail type defense that Virginia Tech fans have gotten acquainted with over the last for a long time there at Virginia Tech. But obviously Brent Pry has rejuvenated it. Antoine Powell-Ryland comes back. You also have guys that you lost, like Mario Kendricks, Nora Pollard, Feldarius Payne, other guys like that. So you lost some, but you also have some really good players back there for the Hokies coming into this season. What can we expect defensively? How active will they be? And maybe what's the strength of this defense coming into this year?
Yeah, I think strengths are in the front and the back end. They really get after the quarterback well. They were tied for the ACC lead in the regular season last year in sacks. I think they had 38, something like that. Powell-Ryland was a big part of that. The tackles were they had to replace a bunch of tackles, but they bring in Aeneas Peebles from Duke, who was an all-ACC performer. I think very high hopes for him to succeed on this defensive line. But it's just a very deep group on the defensive line where they just come after the quarterback in waves. So I think that's going to be a strength. And then on the back end of the defense, they brought back their 2 top corners from last year. Somewhat surprisingly, I thought Dorian Strong might try his hand in the NFL. I thought Mansour Delane might try his hand as a transfer. I think he probably could have commanded a pretty penny and probably did here at Virginia Tech anyway. those are two of the top guys in the ACC. Two guys that are probably going to get drafted next year. And, that allows them to do a lot more with their coverages in terms of leaving them on an island, or, if you have that extra second of coverage, that can mean a lot on the front end to get into the quarterback. So I think those two things work hand in hand, and those are really the strengths of this defense.
All right, let's go overall, and I do still want to get into this matchup coming up Saturday. But in the ACC, Virginia Tech, among some experts, is a trendy pick to maybe even win the conference. But there's also other people that have them still a rung below teams like Florida State, Miami, and Clemson, which, of course, no shame in that. Those three teams are obviously really good. We saw what Florida State did last Saturday, though, so maybe that's an opportunity for Virginia Tech. Where do you see them in the pecking order of the ACC coming into this season, and are they a team you think could be into that conversation in the college football playoff at the end of the season?
Yeah, I think I picked them fifth in the ACC in the preseason. I think this is a very improved team. I think that with everybody back, they're going to take a jump from even last season, but they were a 6-6 team last season. And you look at some of their games, and I've said this many times, it's like, I need to see them beat somebody really good. They played three pretty good teams last year: Florida State, NC State, and Louisville. And they were not very competitive in any of them. I know the NC State score was close at the end, but that was a 20-point game at one point in that contest. So I need to see them hold up in the trenches against a really good team before I'm going to pick them to be the, back. We always say Miami is back, Virginia Tech is back. I think people are really hoping for these ACC teams from the early 2000s to finally be back and sort of help the conference's reputation there. But I need to see them do that on the field before I truly pick that. That said, there is a scenario where if everything clicks and this team is legitimately as good as people think they could be, that, the schedule is favorable enough that they might be a dark horse contender for the playoff. I mean, if things fall right, and we'll see how this new system works out and who actually gets in and kind of what record you need to get. I think they're a contender in the ACC. And if you're a contender in the ACC, you're a contender for the playoff. So I look at the ACC this year, and I don't see like a top, far and away, head and shoulders best team. There's been that in the past with Clemson and Florida State, and they've sort of separated themselves from the pack. Obviously, that's not the case already with Florida State. I don't think Clemson's there either. I think there's any one of 6 or 7 teams that could win the ACC this year, and I'd put Virginia Tech in that group.
It should be fun. It should also be fun this Saturday. Virginia Tech comes to town. Again, 11 a.m. kickoff. You can watch it on ESPN right after College Game Day. Andy, last thing for you. This is an interesting matchup. Vanderbilt obviously struggled mightily last season, one of the worst teams in the Power 5. They made a lot of changes, obviously, bringing in Diego Pavia and basically a lot of the New Mexico State offense, which should be interesting in a week 1 scenario where you never know what they're going to throw at you. For Virginia Tech, some familiarity. Now, it's been a while since Coach Pry and Chris Marv have probably been back, but still a place that they have a lot of respect for and probably love, so should be exciting for them to come back. What are you expecting Saturday when they kick it off, 11 a.m., Hokies and the Doors?
Well, that's the beauty of openers, right? Is you never quite know. We talk about all this stuff throughout the off season. We think we know how it's going to go, and then boom, Georgia Tech beats Florida State in an opener. I think there'll be plenty of points in this game. I think I look at the offenses, and I think they're pretty capable. You mentioned all the New Mexico State guys. Jerry Kill coming in as an advisor on that side. Hokies fans are very familiar with him because he had a big hand in reshaping the offense and sort of saving the 2019 season here as an advisor when Justin Fuente was the head coach. So they understand what he can help with a team and turning around a run game or, just crafting an offense that can be pretty effective. So, I think the offenses might have a day on Saturday coming up. I might be completely misguided on that. You never quite know in these things, but I just think, I think Virginia Tech certainly is primed to have a pretty good offensive day. Cause I think they're eager to pick up where they left off after last year. And I think with all the pieces coming back, including an offensive line where everybody's back and ideally improved, if you're a Hokies fan, I think they can put up some numbers.
It should be fun. ACC, SEC, week 1. I've always loved started the season like this and looking forward to it. So again, 11 a.m. kickoff. That's Andy Bitter from Tech Sideline. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for our Week 1 pregame show right here with VandySports.com. Big thanks to Joey Dwyer, Andrew Allegretta, Andy Bitter, and everybody that made this week's pregame show possible. Looking forward to action. This podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to stay free. So here's how you can help keep it that way. A few things. Number one, give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. You're missing out. It's $99 a year, $9.99 a month, and helps us tremendously. It's a great subscription this time of year, especially during football season. Subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. All kinds of content going up every day right there on our channel. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. That's chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.